Well, hi, everyone, and welcome again to the Musical Innertube. I'm Don Rooney.
And I'm John Timpane. You know, Don's had quite a career in radio and television, where he's been an on-air personality, a news anchor, and even a TV weatherman.
And John has been a college professor. He's written several books, and he's been an editor and features writer at the Philadelphia Inquirer newspaper.
We first teamed up for a radio show in college. On one show, we introduced a soothing musical interlude.
But we stumbled, and it came out Musical Innertube.
And that became the name for this podcast, where we talk with interesting people about their interesting lives, difference makers who've really made a difference.
And today we're talking with Sweeny Murti, who is a sportscaster and a personality on WFAN, fan radio in New York, and he also works with the New York Yankees. Good morning, Sweeny.
Good morning, Don and John. How are you?
Great, thanks.
And Sweeny did something interesting recently. He interviewed some fired coaches from the New York Yankees, and they were very, very forthcoming about what they had done when they were with the Yankees and why they thought they might have been dismissed. I thought it was a great interview, Sweeny, because you don't normally get to talk to these guys after they're dismissed. It's just a blurb in the paper and that's it.
Yeah, thanks, Don. These are guys that I've gotten to know over the last few years. And it's funny, too, because it's a lot easier to get to know coaches now because I'm closer in age to them than I am the players. So that's been a lot different than when I first started covering the Yankees. It was Don Zimmer and Mel Stottlemyre, and I didn't know those guys nearly as well. I got to know them a little bit better as it went on, but I wasn't in their generation at all. So now, the Yankees let go of their third base coach, Phil Nevin, who I believe is exactly my age or 1 year different, and their two hitting coaches, Marcus Timms and PJ Peltieri, both of whom I covered as players on the Yankees and in the Yankees organization during the last 21 years. So I had a history with those guys, and listen, credit to them for returning messages on a tough day. You just find out you're let go. PJ Peltieri was a week away from the birth of his first child, and he found out that he was being let go. So there are a lot of circumstances there with those guys, and it's in professional sports, coaches, managers, whoever, you're hired to be fired. I always credit Terry Francona for this line, but I don't know if he originated it or if it's just in my mind where he said it. He said, they fire you the day that they hire you. They just don't put that date on the contract. So you're meant to be fired at some point. So a lot of these guys understood that and accepted the responsibility of that part of it. And I'm fortunate that they thought enough to return messages and call me back. And I appreciate that they were as forthcoming as they wanted to be or sought to be at the time. I don't think it was, full out, but I thought they were fairly revealing in what they said.
And what was your impression? I guess when you're fired, you expect to be fired generally at some point. But then again, it sometimes always comes as a surprise, and you don't know exactly why you've been let go.
Yeah, there are a lot of factors. And listen, there was a very visible issue. I don't even call it an issue. I think that's unfair. But there was a very visible part of the equation, let's say, with Phil Nevin, who was the Yankees' third base coach. The Yankees had a lot of runners thrown out this year on the base paths and at home plate. And in the wild card game, he sent a run home that got cut down in a key part of the game. That's part of the game. I told this to Phil Nevin in the interview. I said, listen, Larry Boa, who is one of the best third base coaches of the last, quarter century here, he told me if you're not getting guys thrown out, you're not trying. Okay, that's just part of being a third base coach. Guys are going to get thrown out at home plate. The Yankees had a large number of them this year. Part of it was because they ran the contact play a lot. So guys got thrown out because the fielders made a play on a contact play. They didn't have a lot of fast runners on the field, so maybe you had to put the contact play on to try to get a run home in a certain situation, and it backfired at various times. Other times there are sends. Well, listen, this in the court of public opinion, it's a great send if he scores. It's a bad send if he's out. And that's really unfortunately just the only way it breaks down, even though that's not always fair either. Um, so, but that's a small part of the equation. It really had less to do with why he was let go. Um, he is more of an old school kind of guy. And I described him as the bad cop to Aaron Boone's good cop on the coaching staff, and a little bit of reluctance towards the analytics side, the staff, and all the different variations that they try to put on things. There's a little pushback there, and if there are tiebreakers, that probably doesn't help when you're thinking about that. As far as the hitting coaches, Marcus Timms, the hitting coach, mentioned um, that there was a little bit of an organizational philosophy on certain types of drills that he wasn't comfortable with because they were meant for minor league players. And his basic idea is, I've got major league players, not minor league players. And I've got guys who are paid to win baseball games right now, not learn how to hit and work their way up through the minors. So I think that, that was probably a little bit of a difference in philosophy. And I don't think that it meant that they thought they were bad coaches. I think this is a point that gets stressed too. I don't think you let coaches go all the time because you say, okay, these guys were terrible, it's time to go. A lot of times what you're looking at, especially around the Yankees, is, all right, the contracts are up. Do we want to renew here, or is this is this a time to shift the philosophy or shift the leadership? And I think that was a key point when Joe Girardi's contract was up after 2017. The Yankees went to Game 7 of the ALCS in 2017, and Joe Girardi had been there for 10 years. His 4-year contract had expired. The Yankees were putting together a younger team and had made a pretty remarkable run in the playoffs that year before losing to the Astros. And some of the reasons why have since been revealed. But I think at the time then, you sit there and say, okay, is Joe Girardi the guy that you want to move forward with if you have to sign him to another 4-year deal or 5-year deal? It wasn't about, is Joe Girardi the right manager for 2018? It's, is he the right manager for the next 5 years? I think that's what led to the decision of, okay, it's time to make this move. It wasn't, he's a terrible manager, he has to get fired now, blah, blah, blah. When the contract is up, you decide whether or not you want to move forward. And it's not about just moving forward as he's the manager tomorrow. You sign him, you're making a pretty significant commitment for the next several years. And I think that's what the coaching staff is about too. Most of those guys go on 1 or 2 year deals anyway, so it's not that long term as far as different. It's different than a manager, let's say. But that was a way to make changes. And on the surface, okay, you had some guys get thrown out. The offense didn't perform. You could see them as like scapegoat kind of things, if that's the way you want to read it. I'm sure that's a certain part of it too. But I think overall, you look at contracts are up. It's not about the idea of these coaches were terrible. It's, okay, what direction do we want to go in now?
Sweeny, I'd like to take more of an overall look at baseball, and I don't know if you how much insight you could have on this, but it just seems like a lot of teams are clearing out their coaching staffs. A lot of them are getting rid of not necessarily the manager, but a lot of the position coaches. I've noticed it more this year than I've noticed it in the past. I wonder if that's some sort of trend that's going on now.
There were a lot of hitting coaches let go this year, and I think that might have been, offense is at a low. There are, I guess, certain shifts in how people are approaching it and thinking about that. So maybe it stands out a little bit more this year. There weren't a lot of managerial openings this year. There were only less than a handful of managerial openings this year. So there are some years when you're talking about 7 or 8 different managerial openings, and that didn't happen. So that usually takes the headlines. So without that type of traffic to navigate, I guess that we looked at the coaches stuff more. And again, those guys are usually on shorter term contracts of maybe 1 or 2 years, and there's some movement around there. So
Oh, yeah. I wonder too how much of it comes from this the clash that we're seeing now, and it's been the trend for a few years, obviously. But as you mentioned earlier, analytics versus old school baseball that seems to have been clashed in the last few years, and I wonder if that's part of the whole turnover. Are you going for more guys that can meld the two, or are you going more for analytics than old school baseball, or something like that?
Well, I think you're always looking for like just a group that can work together. And it doesn't mean that everybody has to be like minded, but they all have to be open with each other. I think one of the smart things you can do is have people who do disagree with you, but they have to have good reasons for disagreeing with you, not just, oh, this stinks. This guy never played the game, blah, 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 blah. I feel like if you are immersed in all of the information and can have reasonable discourse about it, that's a and again, you don't have to agree. You just have to have a mind to digest everything, and it still comes back to teaching the players. You I think you have to make a decision as an organization. How do we make our players better? What's the best way to do that? I think one of the trends you're seeing now with coaches is coaches when we used to play used to be guys who played in the big leagues for 10 years or 15 years and then they just moved into coaching, right? Well, in the last 20 years those guys made a lot of money and don't need to be coaching after baseball. So you're picking from a different crop. You're getting some guys who have some big league experience, but then you're getting other guys who just really maybe weren't good enough to advance or got injured and had their careers cut short, and they immersed themselves in the coaching side of it to the point where they understand all the ins and outs of what it takes to do it, even if they didn't play 15 years in the big leagues. And I think the financial factor is definitely a big reason why. I mean, there's a difference between a guy who played, say, between 1960 and 1975 versus a guy who played between 2000 and 2015. Lot different financial structure in those eras. So, the guy whose career ended in 1975 is probably looking to stay in the game and keep earning some money, whereas the guy whose career ended in 2015 is probably pretty set and moving on to different things that don't occupy his time quite so much as a coaching gig would. So I think as people look outside the box for coaching candidates, I think that's something you have to consider. You have to be kind of professional coaches as opposed to ex-ball players who just want to keep going.
What do bench coaches do? What is their reason for existing? Can you explain?
Yeah, I think they're basically like the manager's right hand man, and offering up there's a lot of information to digest both before and during games, and I think he's a sounding board for that kind of thing. A chance to offer, okay, listen, what happens if we walk this guy? Well, then this happens and this happens. Or what happens if I pinch hit for this guy here? Or if I bring in this guy, who do they have? What are they going to do? And it's not that the manager doesn't know all these things, but it helps, as I said, to have somebody offer maybe a different educated opinion on it. But, bench coach, I think, is just really like just a guy who is probably like-minded with the manager in terms of how he thinks about running the game. And then he's there to offer up some, this is a good idea. Don't forget about this. Don't forget about that kind of thing.
What about the idea of analytics? How many of these coaches are expected to know about the trends of a batter or pitcher? What percentage, they'll throw a certain pitch, or a hitter will swing at a certain pitch? That seems to enter a lot now into baseball. And how are these coaches adapting to that?
The coaches have to digest all of that, but then their job is to disseminate it to the players in a way that the players can digest it. the coaches are responsible for knowing all these things, but they have to know the players too and the psyche of the players. It's really important to get to know these people. There's a huge psychological element to this because you've got to know what players can handle how much information, in what quantities, in what formats. And there are probably some players you could just hand them your notebook and say, here you go, and they would be fine with it. And other players, you have to boil it down and say, here are 2 things you have to remember. And that's, and stick with that. And a lot of that changes as if you're a hitting coach. A lot of that could probably change as hitters are going well, as hitters are going poorly. Do they have other things going on in their lives that are affecting things? I heard a coach talk to me this year about a player on a team that said, he's off to a bad start because he's not getting a lot of sleep. His wife just had a baby. These are things that you don't, understand when the guy goes 0 for 4. Like that's not even part of the equation, right? Um, you don't think about that. But these are human element type of things that I think the coaches all have to kind of put all of this together. The analytic data and all the formulaic game plan type of things are a very big part of what they do, but they're also a huge element of just knowing how to get through to him and how to clear his mind in order to make him a better player. What can you do to make him a better player? Yelling at him for swinging in another slider low and away isn't probably the right method. There's got to be a lot of different ways to reach different players. And the hitting coaches actually they've all told me the same thing over the years. You're responsible for 13 different players performing offensively, right? Well, how many times are all 13 guys going great? Never, right? You've got, you generally have maybe 2 or 3 guys who are going well, but that doesn't mean that they're carefree and trouble-free. You got another 10 guys who are saying, hey, how can I help me get going here? How do I get going? It's hard sleeping as a hitting coach because you're going to look through a box score of a 7-2 victory, but then you're going to see 5 guys who went 0 for 3 or 0 for 4 and didn't get hits. And you're like, how do I get those guys going? And it's not an easy job for the mental aspect of it. Because I think that's just a very big part of it.
Yeah, I would think also that nobody's harder on themselves than the players. When they're in a slump or they're not hitting, they're really hard on themselves. They really take it seriously.
Well, they should, and it's as a coach, it's up to you to kind of gauge that and measure that. I remember, and the best hitters are not immune to it. It's just a matter of picking and choosing what you do. I remember one year when Don Mattingly was the Yankees hitting coach, Alex Rodriguez was in a major slump. And, you've got to pick your spots. A-Rod at that point had a pretty good history as a hitter, knowing what to do. So, he goes over a couple of games. You're not jumping in to try to fix something. This guy kind of knows what he's doing. Let him figure it out. So, and Mattingly took that approach. And then after it went on for a little while, I remember he told us like he needed to have an intervention, right? He needed to have an intervention with A-Rod. That's what he called it. And I remember the series. It was in June of 2006, and we were in D.C. for an interleague series against the Nationals. And Alex had a big game to break out of a slump, and we started kind of asking some questions, and Don Mattingly basically said, yeah, I had an intervention with him. So even the best hitters are not immune. You get guys who go through a slide. Derek Jeter once went through an 0 for 32 slump. 0 for 32.
That's hard to imagine for Derek Jeter. He was so steady,
300 career hitter. You've got guys who hit 180 in the big leagues who don't go 0 for 32, right? So yeah, there are a lot of things to consider when you're talking about how to manage these guys and how to approach them, when to push them, when to pull back a little, when to try and interfere, for lack of a better word, to break them out of certain habits or get them moving in the right direction. It's not an easy thing to do, and multiply that by 12 or 13. You have unique approaches to every single one of them.
That's so amazing to think about all the teaching that's going on and how you have to, just like a good teacher, you have to somehow shape it to every one of your students, so to speak.
Yeah, listen, listen, I'm married to a teacher, so I know how hard it is, and I will always appreciate the job that they do. But the one difference here is, let's say, you've got a classroom of 25 kids, let's say, right? Well, those are going to be the same 25 kids you have all year. You know, it's not like one of those kids isn't going to be sick for 2 months, and then some other kid comes to take his place. A major league team, you have a couple of injuries, all of a sudden you got guys who really don't belong at the big league level, but are being pushed there because of injuries, and you're trying to get them through and prepare them for how to do it, right? You get guys called up from AAA, and I remember earlier this year, the Yankees had a rash of some different things. They had a COVID situation right after the All-Star break and had to call up some people who hadn't really had a lot of big league time, and they got thrown into a Yankees-Red Sox series. It was after July, so full capacity was back in effect. So you're talking about players who have never played in front of crowds that size, never played in the big leagues, and are thrown into Yankees Red Sox. You've got to get them to prepare to face competition at a level that they've never played before, right? So in addition to all the veteran players that you're trying to get going, now you've got to hold these kids' hands and get them going and remind them that, build them up, that they're here because they know how to play baseball. They're here because they're the next in line. And this is an opportunity for them. But they're also facing big league caliber pitching, and the game is played at a speed that if they've never played in the big leagues or only a short while, it's different. It's different than the minor leagues. If you've ever had the ability to sit relatively close to a field at a minor league game or a high school game or college game, whatever it is, and then watch a big league game, the speed of the game is what is remarkably different. And then again, this becomes part of coaching. When you've got a 22-year-old kid who's coming up to make his big league debut, you've got to give him all the information to succeed that day, because he's not part of this big league roster, and the job of the big league team is to win. But you also have to be very cognizant of what this kid is going through, about never having been here before, and the nerves that come with that, and his ability to navigate that. That's another variable right there, where you're going to have you start your big league season now with 26 players in your roster, but at some point you're going to have 40 or 50 players float through there, and you're going to have to prepare each and every one of them to play that night. That is such a huge thing to, when you think about, and I've learned this just by being around coaches, the care that they have to take in preparing the player for that night's game. Put them in positions to succeed. And that could be as simple as, the backup catcher is a left-handed hitter. So you're going to make sure that he faces right-handed pitching as much as possible. Little things like that. Those are the kinds of things that you have to be cognizant of and make sure you're trying to get, the most out of your players and the best out of your players.
Yeah, I think the minor leagues are becoming more and more important now, because we've seen, you're right, a lot of minor league players come up and either succeed or fail miserably. John and I are big Phillies fans, and the Phillies farmhands who have been coming up have done terrific in AA or AAA, and then they come to the big team and they flame out in spectacular fashion. They go through huge hitting slumps, or they're defensively, they're terrible. And then there's nobody else in the minor leagues to bring up behind them that are any better or worse. So I think the coaching thing, like you talked about, goes down in the minor leagues too. It's how well the minor league coaches do.
Well, and that's an organizational thing, and you have to hire like-minded people throughout the organization. But there's always different reasons for that too. Without knowing the specifics of the players that we're talking about here, I mean, maybe they were brought up too soon because of injuries to other players. And a lot of times the minor league, the old minor league thing used to be, you need 500 innings as a pitcher or 1,500 at bats as a player before you really start to get a feel for who they are and what they can do. And there are players who don't get close to that before they reach the big leagues now. You're rushing through based on what the results are, not necessarily what they've learned and how they've learned it and how to play the game. If Bryce Harper gets hurt, okay, and has to go on the injured list, the player you call up from AAA isn't equivalent to Bryce Harper, and to sit here and expect that he's going to produce to the same level is pretty ridiculous. A couple of years ago, Aaron Judge got hurt with the Yankees, and spent a long time out. And one of the players the Yankees brought up was a guy named Shane Robinson, who had some big league time with the Cardinals, had bounced around a little bit, and at that point, he's basically a career AAA player whose opportunity comes when something like this happens. Aaron Judge gets hurt, and you get called up. So he gets called up, and he's not hitting anywhere close to Aaron Judge because he's not Aaron Judge. And I hear fans saying, "Well, can't you do any better than Shane Robinson?" Like, no, because if you had another Aaron Judge behind Aaron Judge at AAA, he wouldn't be at AAA. He'd be in the big leagues. Your AAA roster isn't made to be exact duplicates and substitutes for your major league players when they get hurt. The Texas Rangers president is John Daniels, and when he was a general manager several years ago, he uttered a line that I repeat like dozens of times a year now because it just fits so much, and it applies in every sport and other aspects of life, I think, too. There is no contingency plan for your best players. When your best players get hurt, you're using other people to fill in for them. You're not duplicating what they do.
You can't hope to.
Correct.
More with Sweeny in a moment, but first, this soothing musical inner tube. If you'd like to hear Sweeney's interview with the former Yankees coaches, check out episode 47 of his podcast, WFAN Baseball Insiders. It's on Apple Podcasts. Just go to Apple and type in WFAN Baseball Insiders in the search box. Again, the interviews are contained in episode 47, but there are a lot more terrific topics that Sweeny discusses on other episodes of the podcast. Sweeny does video too. Check out some fine interviews on SNY.TV. One of my favorites is when he talks to former players Chipper Jones, David Wright, and Jimmy Rollins about playing against each other and then alongside each other in the 2009 Baseball Classic. Now, here's Sweeny talking about baseball's upcoming awards season.
We are about to enter awards season, and it's a crazy time in baseball, and especially for those who are looking back at the season just passed. And I noticed that the three most valuable player finalists in the National League, all of them came from teams that didn't do all that well. You have Harper from the Phillies. You have Juan Soto from the Nationals and Tatis from San Diego. Those are three teams that really didn't burn it up this year. And it's just a very strange thing to think about. Okay, these are the three guys who played the best, even though it used to be that you wouldn't be looked at if your teams didn't excel.
Well, I think it depends on, there's a lot of, those are teams that were in the race. And if other things had gone those teams' ways with other players, then maybe they would have done better as a team. In the American League, Shohei Ohtani is going to run away with this, and the Angels didn't come close to making the playoffs, and you have I think it's Vlad Guerrero Jr. and Marcus Semien from the Blue Jays, who in the final weekend they fell short of making the playoffs. But Toronto Blue Jays won more games than the Atlanta Braves, and didn't make the playoffs. So. I think there's a lot of factors there. I think you're kind of looking for the best teams and seeing who plays well, but sometimes guys stand out. And I think Harper's candidacy was really buoyed by the fact that he kept the Phillies in the race for as long as he did. So that's definitely a big factor.
Yeah, and he had this spectacular season where he was sort of almost, for long stretches, it's almost like he was alone. He'd go up there and get the hit that won the game or tied the game or got the man on base so someone else could, could hit him in. And evidently, Harper's a strange season anyway, because he got up to bat with the lowest percentage of times there was a man in scoring position. He was, something like that.
Wow.
Yeah, I think most of his home runs were solo home runs, and I think that was emphasized.
That's important to consider when, 50 years ago, you'd say, "Oh, look at this guy. He only had 80 RBIs," right? You don't consider the opportunities that need to be presented in order to rack up more. That's why you have more sophisticated stats to try and judge a player's worth than just the old batting average and RBIs.
Let's talk about an upcoming problem that baseball faces in the offseason, and that is the players' contract, or the players' bargaining agreement is up for renewal. What sort of pitfalls are we looking at here? What sort of things are the players looking at? What sort of things are the owners looking at?
Oh my gosh! Well, there's pitfalls everywhere. There are always a number of issues. I think one of the biggest things that they're just going to have to figure out is if there's going to be some sort of adjustment to the structure that gets players to arbitration and free agency faster. Because really owners have pretty much fallen into this idea now that, and they're not wrong, but you stop giving players into their mid to late 30s long-term contracts, right? Any player over the age of 30, it starts to bring up kind of a red flag, and they're not getting paid as much. However, the path to free agency doesn't usually bring a player there until he's around 30. If you think about the idea, you have to get 6 years of time as a big league player in order to reach free agency. Well, if you're drafted out of college, you're drafted at 21, you don't make the big leagues until you're 23 or 24, let's say, and now you have to accrue 6 years, which means you're 29 or 30, and now you get to become a free agent. Wow, great. We're not going to sign you to a long contract because you're over 30. So in order to avoid that, you have to figure out how to get the players to free agency faster. And because here's what happened. The payroll structure was always such that the minor league players don't get paid a lot of money. When you first reach the big leagues, you don't get paid a lot of money relative to other big leaguers. But they say, okay, listen, you play 3 years, and you're going to get into this arbitration system where you can start making a few million into the millions of dollars. And then you play 6 years and you get to free agency, and then it's open bidding, and then you can get the contract that's going to change your life or set you up or this or that. But you're talking about somebody who maybe comes out of high school at 17 or college at 20 or 21 and has to go through all this. And it's always been this idea that, all right, wait it out because your payday is coming. Your payday is coming. Baseball controls what you can make on the front end, but once you get to that back end, then you're in control. Well, the owners decided that they're in control because, it's not a great investment to pay somebody a lot of money after the age of 30. So now, all very legally, they are holding on to their own on the front end and on the back end. And everything in between is kind of negotiated in there too. So it's a way of controlling players' salaries that was kind of an unintended consequence. And a lot of and listen, frankly, all of this comes, with the crackdown on PEDs, you understand the players are not going to perform as well deeply into their 30s on an average basis. So there has to be some sort of way to pay the players more in their early productive years so they're not left hanging in their later years when they decline. I remember Mark Teixeira saying several years ago, when he signed with the Yankees, he was 28 when he signed his free agent contract with the Yankees. And as he's aging through that contract, Mike Trout is becoming a star. And, Teixeira is getting older, he's getting injured, he's less productive, and Mike Trout is getting paid league minimum as he's blossoming. And Teixeira said, "Yeah, of course. Like, I mean, it should be reversed, or I mean, at the very least, Trout should be making a lot more money. Some sort of way to alter that structure is going to be a very big part of this." Um, and the luxury tax threshold is another one because that has to be renegotiated. Listen, the Yankees stuck to had a goal this year of staying under the luxury tax threshold. That is not a salary cap. It is just a negotiated number that says if you stay under this number, then here are certain penalties you will not incur. Well, the Yankees can afford to pay more than that. Other teams can't afford to pay more than that, but they are very cognizant of that number, and it acts as a salary cap. Or I should say, certain teams will treat it as a salary. The Yankees absolutely treated it as a salary cap this year. The moves they made during the season to improve a team that wasn't good enough and needed to get better had all with the caveat that you can only make the moves that keep this team under the salary, under the luxury tax threshold. I almost said salary cap, but that's what it really is, right? So it's restricting spending, and that's going to be something that is, part of the players' mindset too. When teams tank, they are purposely not signing players of any value and trying to get future draft picks. The Orioles have gone through that. The Astros went through that for a while before coming out to what they are now. That's bad business. So yeah, these are all issues that they have. As you and I speak, they have about 3 weeks to figure out before somebody declares an impasse and the whole sport comes to a grinding halt.
A player comes into the big leagues and he waits and waits 6 years, 6 long years to finally become a free agent. And then when he is a free agent, in the last few years, nobody wants to touch him. Nobody wants to sign him to any more than a year's contract, maybe 2. That has to be disappointing for the player.
Yeah, the 30-year-old is in a bad spot because you've aged out of your prime years, and you're only now entering what is your prime earning power, and the point where you can choose where you play and where your future is. That none of that is in your control until you go through all these hurdles of entering the minor leagues, getting through the minor leagues, which could be 3, 4, 5, 6 years sometimes, getting through arbitration, getting through to free agency, and all of a sudden this payday comes and you're 32, let's say, and like, okay, well, here's a 2-year deal. It's and I understand this is all very hard for fans to appreciate because you're talking about money that they're making that fans can't make in whatever form of life that you're in, but it is a highly specialized skill. It is a highly specialized environment. It is an environment that has a lot of money built into it because of the business structure. It's in the owner's pockets. The players who are on the field are fighting for more of their share. It is just about the only instance I can ever think of that when you talk about management versus labor disputes, that the general public the working class public sides with management. When you say this player isn't worth, $10 million, $20 million, $30 million, well, guess what? The owner has that money and 10 times that, and he's just going to keep it in his pocket if the player who is that good doesn't get it. It doesn't get redistributed to you, the fans. Your ticket prices don't go down. That doesn't happen. It is, I responded to a tweet. Gosh, I forget how long ago it was, but it was something about this idea that, somebody was complaining about, I think a player had gotten in late and everything was closed, and there were no room service or whatever. And somebody complained, says something about a millionaire player griping about room service in a hotel, shaking my head. And I wrote back, the guy he works for owns all the hotels. The millionaire baseball player is complaining because he can't get room service in the Marriott. The guy he works for owns all the Marriotts. That's how rich he is. And so this is the dynamic that I don't think gets brought up enough or is understood enough, because I don't think, if you're talking about, bus drivers or steel workers, whatever you want to talk about, I don't think the labor management split is quite the same as it is when you're talking about professional athletes.
I want to ask a question in a wider sense about the sport, the game itself. And I'm wondering whether what your sense is of baseball and the changes it's gone through just in the last 10 years. I'm wondering if baseball is going through an identity crisis right now.
I don't know. I think it's I think part of it is good because they've recognized some of the imbalance in what people do. Like, I guess nobody ever used to look at, if you stole 50 bases, they didn't care if you got thrown out 30 times, right? Somebody decided, if you actually do this math, that's not a good percentage to actually, it doesn't help you score runs. By getting thrown out 30 times, you're taking runs off the board. It's not just the 50 steals that you have. So like bunting, somebody actually does the math and says, when you bunt the guy over to second, he only scores, you're only increasing or decreasing your chances of scoring by this much or that much, because this is what all the data tells us. We don't have the ability to compute all that stuff. So, that kind of thing makes sense. And I think you'd want that, but it's also probably gone a little too far and taken away the entertainment value. And it's not fun to watch, right? It's not as much fun to watch the game because there's more time between pitches mostly, and that is a great deal to do with velocity and pitchers trying to save all their strength to throw each pitch 100 miles an hour, and you're just taking more time between pitches to get there. But I think the great dilemma here is that this isn't, we want to be entertained. We want things to move at a decent pace and just have them do things. We want guys to bunt and steal and do this and that, right? But it is a multi-billion-dollar industry. And teams have understood, like, this helps you win games, this hurts you win games, right? That's what they're paid to do. They're paid to win games. And if they don't win enough games, guess what? They get fired. Like, if you told a manager that, fans want to see more people try to steal bases. Okay, great. But if my guys all keep getting thrown out, are you going to fire me? Because, I'm trying to keep my job. I'm trying to win games. They want to win the game. The players in the field are not concerned with how much time is between pitches or how long the game takes to win, as long as they win. And this is the great dilemma here, is that they're bringing so much information and analysis and slowing it down to try to increase every single minute advantage in order to try to win a game. But it's much, much more boring to watch. You're sitting there, if you're playing checkers against somebody, if they're staring at the board for 10 minutes before they move, that's not very entertaining. But that person is trying to win the game, right? If that person had millions of dollars riding on whether or not they won that game, yeah, you'd take a long time to make that next move too, even if it wasn't fun for somebody to watch.
Okay, well, Sweeny, thanks very much for talking with us today. This is a lot of stuff coming baseball's way, and this is going to be a very, very interesting couple of months. One of the most interesting off seasons we've seen in a long time in baseball. But thanks for all the insight, and like I said, John and I are Phillies fans, so we hope the Phillies go all the way next year. But good luck to the Yankees anyway, okay?
Thank you so much, Sweeny. It's always wonderful.
All good. Thanks for having me, guys.
Thank you for listening to the Musical Innertube.
You can get in touch with us by email. We're at musicalinnertube, all one word, @gmail.com.
You can follow us on Twitter at @MInnertube, capitalize the M and I.
Our webpage is Musical-Innertube, that's musical spelled with 2 A's, .libsyn, that's spelled LIBSYN.com.
The Innertube is available on Amazon Music, Facebook, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio Podcasts, and anywhere you get your podcasts. Like us, why don't you? And give us a good review on any of those platforms.
And as always, thanks to virtual band Car Radio Dog for our theme music.